The dream of space has always been about pushing our limits, right? Exploring new frontiers. But what if that frontier was also our final boundary, death itself? It sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, but believe it or not, it's happening right now. We're talking about sending human ashes to the moon.
So let me just ask you straight up. Would you do it? Would you send a loved one's ashes to the moon? I mean, it's a pretty wild thought, but for a growing number of people, the answer is a very real and maybe surprising yes.
Okay, so for as long as we can remember, spaceflight was this exclusive club. You had to be an astronaut, part of a huge government program. But what we're seeing now is a shift. This whole idea is being presented as, well, something different. It's being framed as a way for anyone to have that final, incredible cosmic journey. It really taps into that deep human desire to connect with the stars.
And this isn't just some fantasy. What used to be pure science fiction is now an actual commercial service you can buy. You can literally arrange for a small portion of a loved one's ashes to hitch a ride on a rocket, right alongside a scientific payload, and become a permanent part of a real mission to the moon. It's incredible when you think about it.
So yeah, in a way, the moon is kind of open for business. And there are a couple of major players leading the charge here in the US. You've got Celestis, which is based out of Houston, and another company called Elysium Space. These guys are the real pioneers, basically creating this whole new industry from scratch. The industry of memorial space flights.
All right, so this probably has you thinking, how? How does this actually work? What are the nuts and bolts? And the big one, of course, what's the price tag? Let's dive into the practical side of how you actually arrange a celestial farewell. Okay, let's just get right to it. The cost. Brace yourself. For about $13,000, the company Celestis will take a sample of your loved one's remains and deliver them to the surface of the moon. Now, that is obviously a lot of money, but for some, it's a price they're willing to pay for what they feel is the ultimate final tribute. And you might be picturing some grand, elaborate ceremony for that kind of money, but the reality is actually much more, well, intimate. We're not talking about a full urn here. It's just a symbolic amount, a tiny portion of the remains, tucked inside a little aluminum capsule that's no bigger than a tube of lipstick. And hey, this isn't some brand new fly-by-night operation. Celestis has actually been at this for a while. Their first flight was way back in 1997, and get this, it carried the remains of some pretty cool people, including a screenwriter for Star Trek. Fast forward to today, and they've already launched over 2,000 of these little capsules into orbit. So you gotta ask, why is this becoming a thing now? Well, a huge part of the answer has to do with a major cultural shift happening right here on Earth. Think about it. Back in the mid-90s, when Celestis was just getting started, only about 1 in 5 people in the US chose cremation. Today, that number is over 60%. It's tripled, and that creates a much, much bigger market for people looking for non-traditional memorials.
Okay, but here's where the story takes a sharp turn, because this whole growing industry is sparking a really profound conflict. See, for a lot of people, the moon isn't just some rock floating in space. It's a deeply sacred place. And the idea of using it as a cemetery, well, that's seen as an act of desecration. And this is where things get really, really complicated.
It really all boils down to two completely different ways of looking at the moon. On one hand, you have people who see this as a beautiful final adventure, a memorial spaceflight. But on the other hand, you have groups like the Navajo Nation, for whom the moon is a sacred entity, and placing human remains there is a serious taboo. It's seen as a true desecration. Justin Ahastin, who's with the Navajo Nation's Washington office, puts it in really stark terms. He says, quote, "It's illegal to dump in the Grand Canyon." And his point is so clear, isn't it? If we recognize and protect sacred places here on Earth, why on earth wouldn't that same level of respect extend to the moon?
And look, this is not just some philosophical classroom debate. This is playing out in the real world, in Washington, D.C. Leaders from the Navajo Nation are taking this seriously. They are actively talking with the U.S. government, trying to get these so-called cosmic burials stopped, to protect what they consider a sacred part of their spiritual life.
You know, this whole conflict over lunar burials, it actually shines a spotlight on a much bigger issue. As we as a species start pushing further out into space with all these new commercial ideas, we're basically walking into a total legal and ethical gray area, a void. We just haven't figured out the rules of the road for this new frontier.
The main piece of law we have to go on is something called the Outer Space Treaty. It's this big international agreement that says space is for everybody. It's the province of all mankind.
But, and this is a huge but, it was written decades ago, long before private space companies were even a dream. So it just doesn't say anything about what private companies can and can't do up there. It's a loophole you could quite literally fly a rocket through.
So all of this forces us to ask some really fundamental questions about our future, right? Where do we draw that line between commercial exploitation and cultural significance? How do we update our laws to actually deal with this new reality? And maybe the biggest question of all is, as we become a species that travels among the stars, what kind of legacy do we want to leave behind?
Which brings us right back to where we started, but now with a lot more to think about. Is space, that final frontier for human exploration and spirit, a place that belongs to everyone in a shared, maybe even sacred way? Or is it just the final marketplace, up for grabs to whoever has the deepest pockets? How we answer that question, well, that's going to define our entire future beyond this planet.